Hi, folks, with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what is clearly a statistical scam on a grand scale here about the number of new dwellings in the West that need to be built to accommodate the mass migration. Now, remember, these are people coming from the third world, so they're not coming from another first world country. But they certainly have expectations of, top of the town entitlement when they arrive in the West. But just looking at the numbers that the government sort of tells us now, the sort of the structure of the narrative is that mass migration is here to stay, can't stop it, and it's a good thing, it's fantastic, it's wonderful, and we just need to build. If there is a shortage of dwellings and housing, then we just need to build more and build it more quickly. It's problem solved. But the mass migration itself is here to stay, and may even be, and probably will be, ginned up and ramped up even further, if that's possible, for goodness sakes, in the future. Now, it turns out that every time housing, the number of dwellings built does start to pick up, then at that same time, the mass migration is also ginned up. So there's always a gap between the dwellings and the amount of people coming in, whether these people are students or on work visas or family reunion, chain migration, that sort of thing. It doesn't really matter, but just the sheer volume of people coming in. Now, the government tells us that the migrants live, these mass migrants from third world communities, they live in approximately the same number of, give or take, the same number of people per dwelling that the indigenous white population live. So the indigenous, the white people already, long-term citizens, and they live, other first world people, they live 2.6 people per dwelling. This is an average that considers freestanding houses with 4 or 5 bedrooms or something, but also a single bedroom apartment somewhere. So 2.65 people per dwelling, and that's the average. And the mass migrants live maybe at 2.8 per dwelling is the claim. So therefore, based on this calculation, we need another 1 million houses or 100,000 houses or dwellings or whatever. Now to compound the statistical sort of fog, the deep impenetrable fog of the statistical games that are being played here, how do we sort of separate new dwellings that are approved new dwellings, because sometimes the first brick isn't laid until 2 or 3 years down the track after the approval. So on one side you've got the number of approvals, which doesn't mean that it's going to go ahead. There can be legal challenges, things like that, but the number of approvals, then the number of dwellings being constructed, but there's no clear sort of calculus on whether or not they're all 1-bedroom apartments, for example, or they're all freestanding dwellings in outer suburbs or whatever. So there's very little information there. And also, as with statistics, when the governments are trying to bamboozle the populace, they'll switch and change, double count, and engage in all sorts of mental gymnastics to try and produce the narrative that they want without actually delivering the facts. And the ratio of building new dwellings to the numbers coming in on mass migration, whether the mass migration is students or this or that, and whether the people can buy property or not. Now, the other thing that's not covered is dwellings that are sold before they're even built. This is a huge number of particularly apartments are sold right off the plan before the first drop of concrete's even poured. So they're sold to Chinese and Indian, the Indian Brahmins and the Chinese Communist Party general goons and all this sort of stuff. So they're sold off the plan again before the first brick's even laid. So whilst there may be, for example, 100,000, we'll just use round numbers here, 100,000 new dwellings that are supposed to be built, 65,000 of those are sold off the plan to offshore investors, not even to local residents or citizens or whatever. Then you add to this the offshore buying, where Australian residential real estate, is now an investment instrument for the the well cashed up drug lords of the world and so on. That there's very little left for local consumption. Now, I want to come back to this issue of how many people live in mass migrants, how many people live in a dwelling. Now, accidentally, and I'm sure they didn't intend to do this, I was looking at a West European country, and they counted the number of people who'd come in, mass migrants from all sources. Then they looked at the number or counted the number of dwellings that were actually built and completed. You don't normally get things that precise, but assuming those numbers are accurate. And then they look at the number of people, the migrants that were housed, and the number of dwellings that they took up. And it turns out that it's 9 people per dwelling. Now, I don't know whether these dwellings are 10-bedroom freestanding houses, or they're 1 or 2 bedroom apartments, or whatever. That's not. But number 9 people per dwelling. Now, if you look at the average bedroom size, number of bedrooms in the dwellings in that country, then the average is 2.5. So let's even run with that. So there's 9 people living for every 2.4, I think it was 9 people per every 2.4 bedrooms. This is mass migrants coming in. Whereas, the local population, it's fairly close to the number of beds. So if it's 2.4 bedrooms per dwelling, then it's about 2.4 people per dwelling of the current or the existing population, the non-mass migrant population. So we can see a very clear dividing. Now, normally the statistics, it's very hard to tease that out of the numbers, given again the mental gymnastics and the determination to push narratives rather than provide clear information. Now, the 9 people per dwelling of mass migrants per dwelling, this ties in with certainly my observations of my lying Nazi eyes. Certainly, wherever I've seen apartments, and where we've been in apartments, we've noticed that there's an unusually, typically, there are exceptions, but typically there's a high number. And the more third world the country they come from, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, the greater the number of people in the dwelling. So it's not unusual to have 17 people in a 2-bedroom apartment, or to have 10 people in a 1-bedroom apartment. This is not unusual. And again, if you look at and I don't know how this happens, but I was going past a park area with like kids' recreation stuff and so on recently, and I think everyone at the park was Indian from what I could see, and they appear in large groups. So there's 20 of them, certainly no less than 15, and 20 to low 20s in a group. They all appear to be related. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just good neighbours or friends or something, but I don't think so. It looks like maybe they're just visitors, but I don't think so. These are, how is it that such large family groups of, parents, grandparents, children, aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews, how are they able to wangle that? How are they able to arrive in such a large, wider family group? Now, some of these people will acquire 5-bedroom houses, 3 bathrooms and 3 kitchens and this sort of thing. And there's a lot of those houses being built these days. Then this whole multi-generational Indian family will move into it, and they'll just take over the whole. So that's so the amount of Indians or mass migrants, Indians in this case, given how many Indians come to Australia, and how hopeless and gutless the Australian government is in waving these people in. They're going to be nothing but problems down the track. They already are. Demanding special dispensations and handouts, special privilege, special representation in Parliament and so on. It's just a disaster that's unfolding. It's a train wreck. Everyone can see that except the globo leftists that are pushing this mass migration crap. But coming back to the numbers here, the average of 9 mass migrants per dwelling. And again, this could be a 1-bedroom apartment or a 2-bedroom house or whatever. Now, if I look at the sort of say the area that I'm in at the moment, which is, living in the moment, which is like, 98% white, the average number of people per dwelling probably is 2.5. And this is all freestanding properties, 3-4 bedrooms, that sort of thing. So that would hold up, unless you're going to the inner city areas, say 1-bedroom apartments. But 1-bedroom apartments tend to have 1 or 2 people living there. The idea of a 1-bedroom apartment for a white Western first world sort of family, the idea of having a 1-bedroom apartment with 3, 4, 5 people in, that's very unusual. Not that it can't happen, uni kids or something like that maybe, but it's rare. So we can assume that the average number of white Western locally born people is around the numbers that does seem to be accurate. So where is the government statisticians telling us lies is where they say where the mass migrants are living. The mass migrants are living in a much more condensed environment. Now, why is this an issue if there are nine mass migrants living to a 1 or 2-bedroom apartment? Why does that matter? Well, it matters because the amount of housing that we're told is needed. So the assumption is that the mass migrants will live, will spread around at 2 people per dwelling. And if that's the case, and you're bringing in 1 million mass migrants, then you need 2 people per dwelling. Then you need 500,000 new dwellings. And so then the government said, well, we're supposed to have 500,000, but we only had 300,000, so we fell short, and that's the problem. We just have to build more. That's the problem. There it is. That's it. Fix that, and all the problems disappear as to increasing real estate prices and so on. In fact, that's not true, though, because if they're living 9 to a dwelling, which I believe is probably accurate or close to it, if they're living 9 per dwelling, then instead of if it's 500,000 or 1 million coming in, then we only need 100,000 dwellings or 110,000 dwellings to be built. Now, so that's more the reality. Now let's switch back again to the amount of approvals. So they interchange the building approvals, buildings are actually commenced, and then buildings are actually completed and ready for occupancy. They fiddle-faff around with the numbers here, so you're never quite sure of what frame of reference that they're using. But the reality is that a very large proportion of buildings are sold off the plan to offshore investors. Then you have offshore investors in buying existing real estate between 25 and 30%. So you actually have a tiny proportion that's actually available for the local indigenous population of somewhere around 15%, maybe 20% of all dwellings completed are available to local buyers at a maximum. So this skews the picture quite considerably, that because there is so much offshore off the plan buying and so on, that the number of, even at 9 per dwelling, the mass migrants coming in, even then it illustrates how the shortages of real estate are occurring and the factors at play that are forcing up the price. And local Western governments are doing absolutely nothing to address these issues. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.